Hello, I'm Andy Limita, and we've been doing a sermon series on the topic of service. And this week we were in 1 Samuel, looking at how we can serve one another through deep friendships. In particular, looking at a passage where David and Jonathan grow a strong relationship, and kind of contrasting it a little bit with Saul's. And when we looked at this on Sunday, I shared a bit about one of my childhood friendships, my closest friendship with my friend across the road. Maybe you have a similar story you can tell, but we had lots of fun, and it was a very significant relationship for me. And when I reconnected with this friend years later, found out that, yeah, he really enjoyed our friendship, but one thing he really appreciated also was my family. Christian family. In particular, my dad always took myself and my friend to do lots of fun things, and that really stood out to him in his childhood during our elementary years when we lived across the street from each other. I'll come back to that story. But in our passage, David has just slain the giant Goliath, and he becomes an overnight celebrity. We can go ahead and flip through our passage for us and read it. Oh, and we're thinking about the image here of being intertwined. Thinking of relationships as kind of being bonded with. Weaved into that type of image, thinking of the book of Ecclesiastes, talking about how strong a cord of three strands is. It's not easily broken. There's strength there. There's comfort. There's protection in relationships. Not just husband and wife, but just in general, relationships are meant to be intertwined. Okay. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner, the general, took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." After David had finished talking to Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops, and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Remember, there had been battle lines drawn in this valley, and Israel had, for day after day, endured these taunts from the Philistine army, and their champion Goliath would come down, and he offered a deal. We'd do a one-on-one combat. Your best fighter against me. The one side will serve the other. Whoever wins, take the plunder. And this has created a stalemate. And young David is sent by his family with food for his older brothers who are serving in the military there. So he's visiting the front lines. And he overhears this taunt, and he has a visceral response. And it's not so much, hey, I can beat Goliath, I'm stronger. It has nothing to do with David's being boastful or thinking about his own strength, but it's almost a zealous response on behalf of God. How can this, he calls him this uncircumcised Philistine, be saying these types of things? And he goes out to the valley against this Goliath, this champion, and Goliath is not impressed. At this point in the sermon, I queued up AC/DC Thunderstruck, so you can imagine that playing. Verse 45 from 1 Samuel 17. David said to the Philistines, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day the carcasses of the Philistine army I will give to the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all you into our hands." Thunderstruck. And David has these 5 smooth stones. He picked up, and one of the stones sails through and sinks into the Philistine's forehead, and he's dead. David, here at the beginning of our passage, is holding the severed head of the Philistine. And Saul has this question, who are you? David's not one of his mighty men. He's not part of the royal court. But Saul should recognize David. I think it's one of those things where someone may be important or significant, like a king, might not notice all of those around him. But David has been enlisted to help Saul by playing music on an instrument to soothe Saul, who became disturbed and had dark thoughts. And David had already been around Saul. But Saul asks, nevertheless, "Who is this young man?" And he just introduces himself simply. He doesn't even give his name. "I am the son of your servant, Jesse of Bethlehem." Very humble response. But David isn't allowed to go home after this. He's enlisted. Oh, here's our victory. It made me think of VJ Day, as the women are singing these songs and the men are returning after this long time away. It's just this great joy. But David is drafted. He doesn't go home. On the spot. And Saul becomes quickly troubled by David's new fame. And the men are marching home, and the women again are singing this song, attributing David with tens of thousands. Just one, really, as far as we count at this point. But and it's all exaggeration anyways. As we read the accounts, they weren't counting. They weren't out there killing and counting. But this is part of the glory that the people are giving to Saul and to David. And he hears this, and Saul is not rejoicing with the people. In fact, these lyrics provoke jealousy in him. And he does not adjust to David's fame. He's overcome with a couple things. And these are key, I think, as we apply this passage for ourselves. Fear and anger. Anger and fear. Saul's not going to share his fame. He's not going to share the stage with anyone. Saul doesn't see himself as intertwined or connected with other people in that way of that closeness. And he won't share his glory. Again, the song. This song is putting me in second place. In the end, though, it's fear that Saul expresses. Verse 8, what more can he get but the kingdom? So Saul starts this policy, keep David close, keep an eye on David. Well, and I'll just give one more example before we think of applying this for ourselves, this brokenness in the passage of fear and not wanting to be intertwined with anger. There's another episode too later on as David and Jonathan have this friendship, this close friendship, where David is worried to go to a banquet that Saul has invited him to. He believes he's in danger if he goes, and so he talks to Jonathan. He says, "Tell your dad that I had to go home. My brother asked me to come home. They were going to offer a sacrifice back in Bethlehem, and so I can't make it. Sorry." And if your dad is not angry, then I know I'm safe. But if he is angry, then I need you to come and warn me. It's a little bit of spycraft going on. David's going to hide in a field behind a stone, and he's going to take someone out with them to retrieve the arrows, and he's just going to pretend like he's shooting arrows out in the woods. And if I shoot an arrow and I say, "It's beyond the rock, keep on going," that means you're in trouble, David. You need to run for your life. And that is the case. In fact, when Jonathan tells Saul David can't make it to this banquet, Saul gets just crazy angry to the point where he throws a javelin at Jonathan. Just misses his oldest son, his heir. So broken in fear and anger. Well, what about for us when you think about fear and anger? And the title I gave for this sermon when we did it was As You Love Yourself. As You Love Yourself. From the greatest commandment. Jesus summarizes the 10 Commandments. Love others as you love yourself. Which seems a strange thing to say. Loving yourself seems like a bad thing. But what it's saying is in the same level of care or interest you show towards yourself, show towards others. So, for example, when I'm super hungry, I find some food. Or if I'm bleeding, I get a Band-Aid or a tourniquet or go to the hospital, whatever I need. This self-care, we might call it. Well, Jesus is saying that's how we treat everyone else. We have this empathy or this capacity or this call to love everyone else to the same extent that we love ourselves. Now, the problem with that, however, is like the example with Saul, and probably with us often, right? Is anger, or fear, or jealousy can cause us not to love ourselves. What do we do instead? We're frustrated with ourselves. We're disappointed. We don't think we deserve love. And the consequence of those types of ways of thinking, operating, is we're cut off from being intertwined with others, and we're unable to really love others. Anger and fear don't lead to love. I'm weak, or I'm stupid, or I'm unlovable. And this affects not just ourselves, but how we treat those around us. And the answer isn't, as some people would think, the quickest thing would be to just really celebrate ourselves and lift ourselves up. That doesn't work. That doesn't really help us to love others. And that doesn't really change our hearts. Because we know in our heart of hearts that we are broken people. We can't just celebrate ourselves and say we're so great and then somehow reach this level of experiencing love internally and expressing it to others. What first has to come, we'll talk about it here in a second, something else has to come instead. Yeah, Matthew 22, chapter 22. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. When you get stuck in jealousy, when you're consumed with anger, when you're crippled with fear, when you're unable to love, why? Well, those selfish feelings or those hurt experiences or ways of thinking don't result in love. They destroy. They get us stuck. It's kind of like in our church parking lot here, a couple times we had a car this past winter that kept getting stuck. And we just had to push and push and push. It was very frustrating for the car owner. But the wheels just spin and spin and spin if we don't have the right answer, if we don't know the right thing to do. We'll talk about that here in a second. Scripture also talks about, we're talking about friendship here, that when people are unequally yoked, it doesn't quite work. And so there can be times even when we are pursuing, we have a great heart and we're loving others, but there's something else going on with them, right? And so that can be another place where we're not able to love others, is their stuff they're not able to love. And it becomes maybe something where we're enabling something, or we're just not getting the feeling that things aren't quite going right in this relationship. We're not intertwined in a good way, but a bad way. Well, the good news in our passage, and we're going to get to 3 things here. Everyone's impressed with David as he kills this Goliath. Jonathan's impressed. The soldiers, the commanders, the women as they're coming home from war are impressed. And his fame is growing. People are noticing David. But people aren't noticing David because he put himself out there. Why was he at the battlefield? He was just bringing food for his brothers. He overheard something. It wasn't like David was thinking, okay, how can I grow my career? How can I get chummy with Saul? What can I do to ingratiate myself to him? No. So the first thing when we think about how we can grow in loving relationships with others is humility. Humility. I come with nothing. And we see this in the gospel, don't we? We see this when we come to Christ. We come with nothing. There's nothing we have to offer on our own. And in this relationship with Jonathan is really deep. Verse 1, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. Their lives were knit, were bound, is the image there. And I think Jonathan loved David so much because he saw himself in David. Jonathan was a warrior. Jonathan, one of the stories is the Israelites were at war with someone, I think the Philistines probably, and the Israelites are afraid, and so they're hiding and they're running away. And in the middle of that, Jonathan, without any permission, tells his armor bearer, follow me, and he goes off into the enemy camp, and like Rambo, kills 20 guys, and it causes such confusion that they start fighting each other, and just everyone just kind of runs, the enemy kind of just runs away from there. Jonathan was a mighty warrior, and I think that was part of the bond there, is this this is someone that's a lot like me, has similar passions, is not afraid to stand up, and not afraid to act. Verses 1 and 3 of chapter 18 repeats this phrase, and loved him as himself. Remember, Jesus said, we'll love ourselves in order to love him. And in this passage a couple times, and later on after this passage, he uses the word covenant to describe what Jonathan and David set up. This agreement, I am going to remain faithful to you in our friendship. When God talks about covenant, when we fail, he's going to remain faithful. There's this ability to interweave, because it's not just that they're sharing a couple interests or like hanging out, but no, I'm committed to you through thick and thin. So, a willingness to receive love and generosity from others. As Jonathan's like, okay, David, I know you have a shepherd's hook. I know you have a sling, but here's my sword. Here's some weaponry. And even here's these things that are point to me as the future king, as part of the royal family. I'm giving them to you. Because Jonathan understood what Prophet Samuel understood also, as he anointed David early on secretly. That David's going to be the next king. And that's part of the covenant they made even. Jonathan said, when you get the kingship, spare my family, be gracious towards me, make this covenant, and they do. Now, David could have not been willing to receive these gifts or this love or make this a covenant, but this is the way towards true friendship, is this willingness to receive. Yeah, it's not transactional, it's honest, it's real. And then the third thing is a willingness to receive love and generosity from God. In the passage and in chapter 20 also, Jonathan understands God is doing these things also, is the one at work. David understands God is the one at work. Together they have this they're equally yoked in that worship of the Lord and understanding that it's God who is doing all these things. And so being willing to receive love and generosity from God. Seems like that's a no-brainer, but in reality, we often can repel that. No, I'm too sinful. Lord, I don't want, I can't receive this forgiveness from you. Or we're just angry with God. No, I'm not willing to receive because of this and this that's happened in my life. There's too much hurt or anger there. But the way towards love and friendship, humility, willingness to receive from others, entering those, even a covenant type weaving together, and a willingness to receive God's love, and that love of God defines the relationship. That's wonderful. And I think the application for this passage is that often we think of marriage or romantic relationships as the ultimate thing. But the reality is, in God's kingdom, that there is a closeness that we can experience, being brothers in arms here. I'm going to read you the passage from later on. Part of the story with my friend that I shared in the sermon was when we were playing in elementary, we thought we're going to live together and near each other again. We're going to be friends for life. And that didn't really happen. But and it didn't happen for David and Jonathan either. When Saul is cut down in battle, so is Jonathan. And so are Jonathan's two brothers. And David writes this lament. And I think this lament, as I close with this, gets to the humility also. David, to the end, doesn't hold anger towards Saul, who sought to control him and kill him. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain. May no shower fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised. The shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, you clothed in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. And then Jesus in Matthew 12. Someone told him, your mother and your brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you. The relationships that we would think are the key. And Jesus says something interesting. He replied to them, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Maybe there's someone that God's calling you to draw closer to, a brother or a sister in the Lord. Maybe God's calling you to more humility. Maybe you're not able to love or receive love because there's too much going on in your heart that's negative. God welcomes us or invites us to lay those before him, and he tells us who we are in him. Maybe it's hard to reconnect with people because you just feel like you can't recreate that friendship, or maybe you had that friendship and something so terrible happened that you're afraid to open up your heart or your life again. Part of God's plan for us to experience fullness of life involves receiving love and giving love and humbling ourselves. So let's offer ourselves to the Lord in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the closeness there can be, even in this broken world, between us and you, our Creator, and between us and others. We ask, Lord, that you would help us to serve those around us by opening our lives to them. Lord, help us to appreciate who we are in you. We're nothing on our own. We're humbled by our own sin, but you call us your own, and you bless us, and you forgive us, and you lift us up, and you make us co-heirs with Christ. As the psalm says, a little lower than the angels, and you entrust us with great things. So, Lord, we pray that you would help us in our identity and how we think of ourselves to embrace that. And we ask, Lord, that you would help us to be blessed by others in close-knit relationships, as well as you would use us to bless others. It's in your name we pray. Amen.